the United States, Germany, Saudi Arabia, and China. These are 4 of the countries in the top 25 destinations for immigrants in the world. As major migrant hubs, these nations and their governments are constantly battling conflict between those who are natural citizens and those who hope to one day become citizens. Governments also are crucial to the formation of immigration policy and law, and thus have been subject to criticism by the public. Immigrants have undoubtedly enriched lives and allowed countries to prosper. Immigration can bolster the economy, expand a nation's cultural dynamics, and save the innocent from political or religious persecution in their homeland. However, an influx of new residents, especially when they arrive illegally, can elicit an array of problems as well. This documentary will explore the similarities and differences concerning the perception, treatment, and policy on immigrants between the United States, Germany, Saudi Arabia, and China.
With over 44 million foreign-born residents, the United States has the largest population of immigrants in the world. Since 1965, when U.S. immigration laws replaced a national quota system, the number of immigrants living in the U.S. has more than quadrupled, and they now compose over 13.5% of America's total population. Out of the 44 million immigrants, however, about 10.7 million of them are unauthorized as of 2017. You might be wondering, why are there so many people coming to the U.S., and where are they coming from? Ever since the establishment of the independence of the U.S., the nation has built up a strong reputation of being the land of freedom and prosperity. People from all around the world have come here to seek the American dream of wealth and happiness. Each year, about 1.2 million immigrants arrive in search of a job, 1 million arrive to be with family, 900,000 arrive for higher education, and about 220,000 arrive to escape violence and political turmoil in their homeland. Among these push and pull factors, there are many parallels throughout American history. In the 1600s, the Pilgrims migrated to North America to escape religious persecution in England. Similarly today, refugees are fleeing religious conflict from nations such as Syria, Burma, Somalia, and Afghanistan for the persecution of Christianity, Islam, and other religions.
ICE, or the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is an agency within the Department of Homeland Security and was initially established in response to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. Their purpose has since been to arrest, detain, and deport unauthorized immigrants living in the United States. According to the Department of Homeland Security, in the 2017 fiscal year, ICE was given a $3.8 billion budget. Under the Obama administration, removing undocumented immigrants who committed serious crimes was prioritized, while during the Trump administration, a more hardline stance was taken as they are targeting anyone who has come to the U.S. illegally, regardless of their criminal status. In 2016, Donald Trump's presidential campaign revolved around the idea that America was in greater need for stricter policies towards all immigrants, specifically targeting those who were here illegally. He and his supporters were concerned about the possible decline of job availability, a wave of religious preaching, and potential terrorist attacks. Of the immigrants detained in immigration detention facilities, an average of 51% were classified as posing no threat, which typically includes people with low-level and nonviolent criminal convictions.
Despite the current leader, Trump, and his supporters' adamant proposal on racism towards immigrants, a majority of Americans still believe immigrants strengthen the United States rather than harm it. However, there are generational differences in opinions about immigrants. 3/4 of millennials say immigrants strengthen rather than burden the U.S. Meanwhile, only 63% of Gen Xers, 52% of baby boomers, and 44% of the silent generation see immigrants in a positive light. Despite this majority, those in power, such as Trump, are advocating for stricter legislation concerning the deportation of illegal immigrants in the United States. In June 2018, Trump tweeted, "We cannot allow all of these people to invade our country. When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. Our system is a mockery to good immigration policy and law and order."
What is your name and when did you immigrate to the United States?
My name is Beatrice Tan, and I came to this country. I arrived in San Antonio, Texas, May 4, 1964.
How old were you when you immigrated?
I was around 27 or 25.
Did you immigrate with anyone? Or were you
No,
by yourself?
I came by myself because they have a program they call the Exchange Visitors Program for people who have career in medical profession, either you're a pharmacist or a nurse, because they were in great need of those.
So, what did you hear about the United States before you immigrated that made you want to come here?
Oh my goodness, everything is just the best. The work, the pay, the food, and the way they treat the nurses. Like you have 2 days off a week. Wow, we never have that back home. Working conditions, salary, and also there is, at least this is to my personal experience, they always seem to have a big respect for us because they think we are very knowledgeable. My first experience is what, oh, this is heavenly. The plane stopped at LA International Airport, and we found everything is just, the bathroom is so clean, and paper towel, and everyone's so nice.
Despite the fact that some may perceive rising numbers of asylum seekers as a threat, Germany initially adopted a welcoming attitude. In 2015, Chancellor Angela Merkel agreed to open the country's borders to more than 10,000 asylum seekers stranded in Hungary and declared that Syrian refugees were welcome in their seeking of asylum.
Additionally, various human rights organizations have attacked Germany for keeping their immigrants in the same facilities as convicted criminals. This includes the CPT. The CPT, a human rights organization, publicly accused the federal government of injustice, stating, "The CPT has repeatedly stressed that a prison is by definition not an appropriate place in which to detain someone who is neither suspected nor convicted of a criminal offense." The committee also notices that the federal government shares its views on this matter. However, it remains concerned that such limited progress has been made in this respect at the level of the Länder. The federal government responded by saying, "In the opinion of the authorities of Hamburg, it is not necessary to establish a special facility for immigration detainees in order to provide humane accommodation. Detention conditions in Fußbüttel prison are reasonable," they claim, since the immigration detainees are always kept separate from prisoners. Similarly to the United States, Germany's people are torn between their treatment of detained illegal immigrants. They have both been criticized by their own citizens, organizations, and countries around the world. However, Germany has been first in making steps towards eradicating this method of immigration detainment. In recent years, Germany has come to embrace its role as an international migration destination. They recognize the positive impact they can make in the wake of political and cultural turmoil in other countries. In an interview with Aiden Ozuguz, the current German Commissioner for Immigration, Refugees and Integration, she was asked about their recent acceptance of 1 million refugees from Syria. She responded, stating, "We had to help at the time because there was a humanitarian crisis on our doorstep. There was the war in Syria and the difficult situations in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also the terrible conditions on the Balkan route, where refugees without food or shelter, some of them carrying babies or small children, were stuck in rain and mud and camping in cramped conditions outside train stations. We have now come out of the absolute emergency mode and asylum procedures are working in a somewhat more orderly and rapid fashion. Quality assurance remains an important issue here." Despite this largely welcoming stance from Germany and its people, the ever-increasing influx of immigrants has resulted in a stricter stance from the government. However, in the grand scale of things, Germany remains to be much more welcoming to immigrants on both federal and community levels. However, with this, and similarly to the United States, racism and resistance to immigrants and refugees still exists within Germany.
As there is little government transparency from Saudi Arabia and all detention practices over-controlled by the state, it is difficult to report the whole truth on the current state of illegal immigrants living there. What is clear, though, is the heavy reliance of the government on cruel detention facilities to control the influx of refugees and illegal immigrants living in Saudi. Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, both the king and prime minister of Saudi Arabia, has been adamantly advocating for the process of Saudization. Also known locally as Nitakat, it is the program recently implemented by Saudi's Ministry of Labor, which requires Saudi companies and enterprises to fill up their workforce with Saudi nationals up to certain levels. Abdulaziz stated in 2011, "Work is a right enshrined for every citizen, and the government of Saudi Arabia strives to help provide it. In order to bring down unemployment and to create suitable job opportunities for the sons and daughters of this nation, the Ministry of Labor and Social Development is obliged not to approve applications for recruitment of expatriates and employment of the non-Saudi employees unless it is assured that the qualified national labor is not available or not sufficient." The direct effect is the replacement of migrant workers with Saudi citizens, thus lowering Saudi's desire for more skilled workers. In Saudi Arabia, as in the other Gulf states, immigrant labor is managed through the kafala sponsorship system. Immigrants must have a confirmed job before entering the country, and must work for their sponsor for the duration of their stay. Sponsorship and a job is a requirement for a residence permit, iqama. In theory, therefore, if the job ends, the immigrant loses her sponsor, and consequently her iqama, and must return home.
With many similar policies to the U.S., the punitive measures implemented by the Saudi Arabian government have been increasingly violent and forceful in recent years. A deported Yemeni worker from Saudi Arabia recounted his time in the detention facilities, stating, "When they started deporting people, I was working as a day laborer in Jeddah," he said. "I was afraid because of the deportation campaign and turned myself in to go back. They kept me in Burma prison for 15 days. Sometimes they brought food, but it was very little and people fought over it. There was no medical care. Sometimes they slapped us with belts. The jail conditions were bad. There are no clean bathrooms and no separation barrier so we could see others using the toilet. They took the batteries from our phones and our SIM cards, but some people refused to give them over and the guards beat them with cables. There have been occasional reports of illegal immigrant deaths due to violent uprisings within these facilities. These deaths hold remarkable similarities to those currently happening at the southern border of the United States. However, Saudi has not subjected any children to detention facilities, unlike the U.S.
China's place in the global migration order has been transformed by 3 decades of rapid economic development. Policies to reform and open the country, initiated in 1978, accelerated Chinese immigration and internal migration. While these flows remain important, there has also been an increase in the number of foreigners making their way to China. For nearly 3 decades, migration to China was regulated by the 1985 Law of Administration of Entrance and Exit of Foreigners. Since the law's enactment, there has been a 35-fold increase in the number of foreign entries. However, being fairly new to immigration, the first time China's national population census recorded the number of resident immigrants was in 2010, whereas the U.S. started continuous recordings of immigration to the United States in 1820. Since 1892, there has also been the creation of a separate Office of Immigration, now part of the Immigration and Naturalization Service in the U.S.
In this 2010 National Population Census from China, it was recorded that 593,800 foreigners lived within the territory of China out of 1 billion total people, a very small fraction of the overall population. However, similar to the U.S., a high-profile official campaigns to crack down on illegal immigrants have been launched. On top of this, the 2012 Exit and Entry Law raised the penalties for all immigration offenses, like doubling the fine for overstaying from RMB 5,000, which is equivalent to $800, to RMB 10,000. Similar to the U.S., China also detained some of their migrants. Quote, "Both before and after the law's passage, unauthorized migrants unable to pay for their own repatriation were detained for months and even years," unquote. However, in the 2013 Exit and Entry Law, it was stated in Article 58 that the period of detention for investigation would not be allowed to exceed 30 days, while complicated cases would be extended to a 60-day period. In Article 61, some other restrictions in terms of the foreigner's condition were stated, ranging from sickness to age limits. This differs from the U.S. because there have been cases of detainment of children under the age of 16, those who were ill, and mothers who are still currently pregnant.
In retrospect, the Chinese government is very restrictive with who they actually allow into the country legally. The Chinese green card is famous for being difficult to obtain and rare to have. It may look like China has become more open to immigrants due to a total of 1,576 foreigners being granted permanent residence in 2016, an increase of 163% from 2015. However, most of the recipients are still ethnically Chinese, and their immigration policies illustrate their prioritization of attracting foreign talent in order to increase economic modernization. Frank Peek, a professor of modern China studies at Leiden University in the Netherlands, stated that the Chinese policies are very similar to those of Japan and South Korea, in that they are a very strong nation-state that defines as a home of a particularly ethnic and cultural group that wants to maintain its purity and wants to let in only what it really, really desperately needs.
As conflicts such as religious persecution and political wars flood the nations of our world, more and more men, women, and children are displaced from their homes and forced to seek refuge in the opportunities of other countries. Failing economies or attractive reputations have also attracted a mass amount of immigrants to major hubs such as the United States, Germany, Saudi Arabia, and China. While the US, Germany, Saudi Arabia, and China all employ some form of detention facility, the safety and quality of conditions of these facilities vary greatly and reflect each nation's government's perception and policies on their immigrants. Within the United States, the immigration crackdown crusade led by President Trump has resulted in the death of children and separation of families at the southern border. With Germany, the recognition of their role of aid in the wake of humanitarian crises has prompted them to begin reforming their method of detaining illegal immigrants.
For Saudi Arabia, their desire for prioritizing the employment of Saudi citizens over admitting foreigners has resulted in multiple raids and harsh detention facilities in an attempt to enforce their strict immigration laws. And for China, their selective outlook towards foreigners has thus prompted strict policies that only allow certain people with a strong bias towards those who will retain China's purity and benefit the economy. Overall, the trend is not only stricter immigration policies, but also the enforcement of these policies is influencing these major immigration hubs around the world.
Overall, the trend of not only stricter immigration policies, but also the enforcement of these policies is influencing these major immigration hubs around the world. This growing trend of strictness mirrors that of the United States during the 19th century. The Native American Party, renamed the American Party in 1855 and commonly known as the Know Nothing Party, was a nativist political party that reached its peak in the 1850s. Their beliefs were primarily anti-Catholic, xenophobic, and hostile to immigration in general. Although not all nations have widespread xenophobia permeating their society, the desire for stricter policies for the sake of the well-being of the country are becoming apparent to more global leaders. The United States also implemented the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 to exclude the immigration of all people ethnically Chinese. Although this legally targets a specific race, Americans then shared the same present-day fear of some people today that immigrants would take over jobs and contribute to growing crime rates. This sense of nativism represents China's main requisites for becoming admitted as a resident, as China too wants to keep their nation ethnically Chinese through the implementation of legal policies.
The United States' stern policies on the admission of immigrants and the desire to prioritize one's own citizens over foreigners reflects the modern policies of nations such as Germany, Saudi Arabia, and China. However, each nation is unique in its own right, each with varying conditions in their detention facilities and differing perspectives on accepting those of various cultures into their nation.